Should be coming back shortly. We back. Hello, testing. It looks like it's working now. Just gonna wait till someone actually hears me. Original recipe. Sweet. Okay, we're back in business. So, given that I have no idea what you heard and didn't hear, unfortunately, I'm gonna reintroduce this briefly and start over-ish. What I'm hoping to accomplish on the stream today is some sort of basic DevOps integration that will get us from get us into a workflow where when I submit code to a pull request against the repo, it will run a series of tests on Circle CI that will test to make sure that the software is still working before accepting the pull request. So I won't be able to merge the pull request unless the tests pass. After the pull request is merged, if it's merged to the branch that I'm using for development or staging, it will deploy to a Heroku web dyno, which will be our staging environment so that my team can test it on our staging servers. And at that point, that's sort of a reasonable DevOps CI workflow. We'll also include in the testing making sure that the lint is running successfully so that the code is oh boy, someone's gonna get mad at me, but formatted correctly. And I don't even, well, lint's not really a format checker. It's linted. We'll just use that verb because that's easier. Beyond that, I will make sure that I can't just commit code directly to master, say, for example, so that I'm not accidentally committing code to production. There's a lot of setup and nitpickiness that goes on here. This is my personal workflow for doing it. There are a trillion ways to skin a cat when it comes to this. These are the services I've used in the past and the ones that I find convenient and easy and smart to set up. I would love to hear feedback if you've got a better way or a different way or something that I can tweak to make this better. With that all said, let's now look at how we want to accomplish this. So, in package.json, which is the sort of metadata descriptor file for our project, for the jobs module or the microservice here, this lists out, like I said, a bunch of metadata, the dependencies for the project, as well as the scripts that it executes. My hope here is to write a test script that, when executed, it runs a series of Jest tests, which is Jest is a Node testing library developed by Facebook. It'll run these tests against the repo locally on my machine here. If I run just sort of npm test or yarn test, those will be the same tests that Circle CI runs for the sake of making sure that I'm writing good code and functional code. So a gigantic disclaimer before I do this: I have very little experience writing test cases with Jest, so this is going to be a lot of learning for me. It's a good thing to do. We'll probably start with an extremely basic test case, something that just runs the app and makes sure it doesn't fail or something like that, to get the entire DevOps sort of workflow going. And then when I'm confident that that's working, at least in a way that I expect, then we can go into building tests that are more thorough and hopefully test against a pretty big surface area of the code that's in this repo. This is as much a learning experience for me as it is for you, so caveat emptor, or whatever you want to say. I'm learning as I go. It may be a frustrating thing to watch, but hopefully that's also entertaining because of the whole Schadenfreude thing in human psychology. All right, let's get started. So Jest is the testing library we're going to use. It's delightful JavaScript testing, incidentally. There are some docs for Jest on their repo. We've already done this step, sort of adding it as a dependency. Let me see if I can put these side by side quickly. And also, before I forget, I'm going to zoom in on this. Great. So in my dev dependencies, there should be Jest. That is true. I might quickly check to make sure that it is on the most recent version in my terminal here. Yeah, okay. So there's this command you can run, yard upgrade interactive latest, which will check all of my dependencies in the app against what's currently published to NPM. We can see that there's a minor update to Jest 2240 to 2242. That's lovely. We're also going to update NodeMon and Express while we're at it. These all have fairly larger bumps. That probably won't be a big deal, but I like to do the revision package updates first. So we're going to do that. It'll take a second, install the new dependencies, and then we'll commit our changes after running this to make sure that everything works still. So all this is kind of a thoroughness of DevOps, this is a DevOps chore that you should probably get used to too if you're building node projects, just to make sure that dependencies are up to date. If you have something that's deployed, it keeps everything secure, or as secure as it can be when you're using someone else's code. There are a lot of hypothetical issues that can still come up if you do that, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll use this. Okay, so it looks like this is still working. You can see the page is still loading, and in the background, the terminal's doing whatever magic it's doing to display stuff to me. So I'm going to commit some code here. Ooh, it looks like there's a change that I didn't commit from last time we were working on this. That is a... Okay, we're going to get rid of that console at least. Oh, shoot, don't save my changes there. So let's make this big. In the job listing, there's a console print here that I don't need to print any longer. This is purely a debug tool. Just make sure that I only made some changes here. That looks like a... Okay, yeah, that's all from last time. So I'm going to create a commit first for this. Source components job listing. Git commit -m update function call. Sure, that's a terrible commit. And then we're going to add with new revisions on npm. Great. Okay, so we'll leave it at that for now. This should still run once again. Nothing should be broken here. Yeah, it looks like that's still running. We can double, triple check that, but this is going to come up still. Okay, so now that we've updated Jest and we've confirmed that it's in the project, we're going to write a very simple test. There are several different ways you can write tests in Jest, or what's a better way to say it? There are several different ways you can name your tests in Jest that it will look for. You can go with something that says .test.js, and Jest will know to look for that. You can also create, I believe, a directory at the root of your project, or I think actually in any directory of your project, called this tests with surrounded by 2 underscores on either side. I don't really have a preference, but for the time being, because this is such a small project, I'm just going to put them next to each other. So we're going to create a new file here, and it's going to be job listing.test.js. There we go. And we'll look at how we can write a simple test case here. So first thing we have to do is go into the package file and add this test script that we were talking about before. All it does is run Jest, Jest being the test library here. And we may have to do some magic to make sure that Jest is included by our transpiler here, but a very simple test is exactly this, or something like this. We could write a stub function like that, but here, let me maximize this so you can actually read. So, oh yeah, here we go. So we do need to add some transpiling. You don't need to install anything extra for using Babel. If you're using Babel version 7, then you need... I don't think I am. Babel, yeah, okay. So don't forget to add a Babel RC in your project's root folder. If you're using ES6 and React, let's see, I believe that's done already too. No, okay. Well, what do you know? So we're gonna create, this is all transpiling goodness. And we need to add these guys. Ah, shoot, that's not what I wanted. Yarn add debabel preset env. I should have done these both at the same time. Yarn add debabel preset react. Bingo bango, we are all set with that. So, if I run jest now in this directory, it'll look for test cases. It'll probably complain that there's no actual tests in that one test file if it finds it. Your test suite must contain at least one test. That's a good start, though. So I found the test file, and so now we have to write a test. So let's go to the actual docs for this. Create a file named sum.test.js. And the syntax takes a little bit to get used to, but it's actually not too bad. So in our file where we're going to write the test case against this job listing, and to be honest, this might not be a great place to start because this is rendering a component. Let's do... You know what, we can write against util first. That's a nice easy one. So in my source folder where this util is, I'm going to make a util.test.js. We'll come back to this job listing test in a bit. And we're going to, the first test we're going to write is against this distance between 2 points function. It shouldn't be too hard. So this is what tests look like for jest. We're going to say expect, import, const utils equals require util. Dot, ooh, I don't actually export it. We're going to export it so we can test it. Okay. So we'll test the distance between 2 points function, and this is kind of what the syntax looks like. So we have this expect, and then there's this to be syntax that can go after it, and this is where we expect the result to happen. So my linter is complaining about test is not defined because this needs a jest added. Yarn add ESLint jest plugin? No, I think it's plugin jest. Okay. Now this is hopefully not complaining about that any longer. It still is. We'll have to figure that out a bit later on. So let's go back to that actual test script, and we're going to create 2 points. let's say, so I need to figure out what the inputs for this function should be, which is a sign that I have done a poor job of documenting this, because that should be obvious. They should have a dot latitude and dot longitude. So let's write a little comment here. Position 1. Let's see. A position object in the form latitude, longitude. There's probably a better way to write this, taking advantage of all of the nice things that JSDoc has to offer, but I'm not really an expert on that either. There's always room to learn, though. Returns the distance between 2 points given two geographic points. And this is a Cartesian. Okay, so now there's a whole notion of something called test-driven development, where you write the test cases first and then make your code function against those test cases, which is a smart thing to do, in part because a lot of the times if you go and write the tests after the fact, it's really easy to write tests that pass no matter what. So for example, I might write distance between 2 points for where I live in Charlotte and New York City, run the calculation myself and write one test case for that, which would look something like this. So const Charlotte position equals latitude, figure out what that should be, longitude, figure out what that should be, and we'll get the actual distance between these 2 points. Okay, so in this case, it's really easy to write this test to be 0 because I haven't actually defined any latitude and longitude points for either of them. We can run this test and it'll probably pass. Yeah, look at that, it passed, even though those aren't really valid points. It will work, right? This is technically a functioning test case. We do have in here this constants file, which has all these markets in it, which is lovely. So we're actually going to import const markets equals require, and we'll grab our constants, and hopefully that has markets defined that way. It has it defined this way. And instead of this, we're going to say markets dot, we'll get the ID for Charlotte, 61, dot coords, and we'll do the same thing for New York City. And we're going to kind of back our way into this. There we go. So now this test will fail because I have actual distances in there. So what this is saying is the distance is expected to be 0, but it got 8.76, which is a funny value still, but that is a distance in latitude and longitude, right? That's not actually miles or anything like that. This hasn't been converted. But basically what I'm going to do is work my test case backwards. So I'm going to say const distance between Charlotte and NYC equals that. Look at that. Suddenly I've got a working test case. Again, I'm sure. Actually, it might not work, depending on rounding error. Oh yeah, look, it worked. So I guess the whole point of that exercise is that I wrote this test and the test works, and it would be possible to submit this to as a test case against this whole function to say that, okay, now the distance between 2 points function is tested and it's good to go. But there are a number of ways in which this is lacking. So I will show you. We're going to write a couple more test cases and I'll explain why this is not sufficient. Okay. So one of the things I'm not currently happy with is I know there's a way to write a whole suite of tests against one thing that fall under the same name. I don't know what matchers is. We're going to find out. I'm just looking for a very specific syntax. I guess I could do it like this. Yeah, actually that's fine because it'll be grouped by the file. So here, I'm going to write another test case based on this. We're going to move these definitions up because we'll probably use them again. That all is great. So now I'm going to write another test based on this, and we'll give this test a better name. Should be calculated accurately. This one is going to be should return 0 if points are the same. So this is another test case you might reasonably be expected to write. Make sure that if you're testing against two of the same points, they should be 0, they shouldn't be null, they shouldn't be false or anything like that. But what about should return an exception if only one point is provided? So we're going to write a test against that because you can't do the distance between only one point. So expect util.distance between points of Charlotte position null dot to throw to so there's specific function for exceptions here, or not function, syntax is what I'm looking for. Throw, to throw, yeah, okay, to throw. And this is also a valid test case, but the way the code is written right now, boom. Distance between Charlotte and NYC is calculated accurately. It should return 0 if points are the same is correct, but it failed the test against should return an exception if only one point is provided, because currently I'm not checking for that, right? We're getting right into it and looking at latitude 1 and latitude 2 without checking to see if those positions actually exist. So I'm going to actually write a test case against both of those, which would be this. It's thorough. And so now, in the spirit of sort of test-driven development, these would have been written first, and then I would have gone and written a function that would work against them. Because we're kind of backing our way into this, which is maybe not the right way to do it if you're being really traditional about it or whatever you want to call it. Now I need to go and fix my code so that this works, and we'll do that presently. So we're going to say if not position 1 or not position 2, we're going to say throw new error. Two positions need to be provided to calculate a distance. That's a helpful message that will show up in the console when that error happens. So let's see now. Throw a new error, 2 positions. Command failed. Oh. Oh yeah, okay, well. So I would sort of have expected that to pass the test case because it threw an error. Maybe I need to write that a little more specifically. Let's take a look at this. If we want to test the drink flavor octopus throws, because octopus. Yeah, so I actually would expect that to have worked. Let's see what's going on here. Maybe my syntax was incorrect. I'm losing my voice again. Excuse me. Okay. Well, tell you what, rather than running this in the test environment, let's test it from the actual app itself. And we're just going to run here. We're going to say and this is going to be an object with a 0 in it and a null here. And this should get me to the same place, right? So if I run yarn start, this should definitely fail. Unexpected token. I don't disagree with you. Oh, I see. There we go. Well, it's definitely throwing an error. That's great. I'm not sure why Jess isn't picking it up. No, you must wrap the code in a function, otherwise the error will not be caught and the assertion will fail. Well, what does that mean? I would guess that means this function. Oh. Maybe I didn't do that. I see. So it has to go inside of the expect. Look at that. Okay, so now this should work. Yeah, look at that. Okay, so that's just a nuance of jest. So like I said, I'm learning that still, but that's the only way to catch an exception is if it's within a function returning sort of the output of that function, which would be the exception. That's cool. This is a little aggravating and I'd like to get rid of it. But maybe we'll work on that. So my point here is you can see how this is testing this function more thoroughly. One thing I might also test for in this guy, so when I'm writing this function to the best possible capacity, is a type check to make sure that positions both have a latitude and a longitude. So So this is saying basically if either of these are missing a latitude or a longitude, we're going to throw new error. Both input coordinates must have a latitude and longitude provided. Specified. Ooh, specified. Will it save? It now formats that in a way that I probably wouldn't have ever done. We're still dealing with prettier, if you recall. And so now we can test against that too. So we would do test. Both input coordinates must have lat and long provided. We're going to define a new point here. Const formatted point equals latitude 0 and no longitude. This point is intentionally missing longitude. So here we're going to test for Charlotte position to malformatted point, and that should throw. And we're going to do a bunch of these. So we're going to do swap them, malformatted point on one side, Charlotte position on the other side. The point here is to be as thorough as is reasonably expected, or reasonably thorough, maybe is the right way to put it, without killing yourself. There are organizations that can afford to have, suites of test engineers who do nothing but write test cases all day. And the point of that is to make sure that your code never starts to break, right? Like code gets updated all the time, and you want to make sure that a minor patch to something doesn't bring down a whole network. Which if you follow tech news like Hacker News and stuff like that, this sort of stuff does really happen all the time because it's a complicated thing to manage, and there's a balance to be struck between the right amount of tests for a function versus how often it's used and how impactful it is and whatnot. So let's run the tests again. I'm not going to do this the whole stream, but I just want to give some good examples of tests here like I said I would, and then we'll move on to the next step. Something else I might test for, I'll leave some comments for other tests. Other tests I might write for distance between points. And we're going to do like this. Make sure lat and long are numeric and valid. Yeah, there we go. Make sure lat and long are valid latitudes and longitudes. Make sure distance is calculated correctly across negative and positive lat long. So because we're working with a sphere, the globe is defined in two sort of 180-degree hemispheres, and the interesting points along that hemisphere for this calculation are when it goes from 0 to 180 in both directions, so negative and positive. So at one point it meets at sort of 1 and negative 1, and then at the other point it meets at, I guess it'd be 179 and negative 179. And we need to make sure that calculations across those two surfaces, both on latitude and longitude, work correctly. So that's probably a particularly important test for something like this, and the kind of thing that could definitely come to bite you if you hadn't thought of it beforehand. I was talking to actually a friend the other day who works for a startup here in town, and they launched a service that manages a pretty complex schedule of people running tasks throughout the city here that they have to drive around the city, which was working phenomenally, and they did some really cool algorithm work to make sure that the people in that city were scheduled to do these driving tasks around town in the most efficient path possible. But what they didn't take into account, which happened recently, was daylight savings time. So when daylight savings happened, some of their customers' appointments were an hour off in one direction. Some had already adjusted for it, and it was kind of a nightmare. So that's the kind of thing that a test like this might prevent against. The catch is, of course, that you have to think of that test in order to write it, to test against it, to make sure that you're compliant with the logic that you need to put in place. So, for the sake of demonstration on stream here, I'm going to let these 4 tests be my entire test suite for the time being while we set up Circle CI integration, and then I might come back and write some more tests against the other parts of this software. For now, this will do. So let's look at what we have to do to get Circle going. So I'm going to close all these files, and we'll go to Circle CI's docs here. So I'm adding this is the repo, I'm adding it to Circle CI. This is sort of inside of their app already. What they do actually is they go and integrate with GitHub. So I've authenticated Circle CI with GitHub. It's looking at my repo already, and what it's done is it's determined that it can run either on Linux or Mac OS, or it probably runs on either Linux or Mac OS. In fact, I'm not sure Circle tests against Windows. It may well. So it asks which OS you're on, it asks which language you're using, which is already inferred based on the repo and what's in there, and it gives you some instructions for how to configure Circle for it. So it's actually pretty easy. And there's some interpretation and different approaches to this, but we'll start with a fairly simple one. So step 1, create a folder named Circle CI and add a file, add a file called config.yml within it. File path will be Circle CI config.yml. So we're going to create a .circle CI, and I believe VS Code will detect that that is, nope, maybe not, config.yml. Yeah, okay, there's some formatting. I thought there was a special Circle CI integration here. Populate the config with the contents of the sample YML shown below. We're just going to copy that to the clipboard and paste it in here. There we go. Use the sample YML to reflect your project's configuration. Push this change to GitHub. Start building. This will launch your project on Circle CI and make our webhooks listen for updates to your work. So we're going to do all of these changes first. We'll write this to work against our repo. Oh, and actually before I do this, I'm going to take one step backwards. So this function here, yarn test, it's important to me, or at least I think it's a good practice to have a CI command. So we're going to do test. Oh, actually, no, we can do this a different way. So my whole point is in CI, I'm going to run this test script and this lint script and make sure they both pass, just for the sake of being thorough. So let's go into that config file, and we will do them in here. So this is a YAML file, which has a specific format. It's a lot like JSON. It's just a little more compact. A lot of this stuff comes from Circle's specifications for what their YAML file looks like for the config. This creates a Docker image of Circle CI /node 710. We can specify the version we desire based on that. We could go see what Docker images are available here, but that one will probably work. It creates a working directory, which we can, which we'll use. It's home directory /repo. I think it's best practice to put the repo name in here. And actually, this repo is not called jobs module. It's called jobs microservice. So we're going to hang on to that. It checks out the code, so it pulls it down from GitHub. It pulls down the cache and dependencies, which is fine. It runs yarn install. It then runs yarn test. We're also going to run yarn lint. And that should be it. That is all it takes to send this thing up to Circle CI. So I'm going to commit the various codes we've just written. So we're going to do git add Babel RC, git add source util test.js. We're going to do git add Circle CI. Okay, you know what? I'm going to do this in the UI because it's just going to make my life easier. So here we go. So first I'm going to do the test stuff. which is here. So update dependencies, config for jest. That's going to be this guy as well, and this guy. We should get rid of that code, which is no longer necessary. So let's do that. We're going to add these test cases in. We'll commit that. And then we're also going to configure circle CI. So we're going to push these 5 commits up to GitHub in a moment. Actually, no, I'm just going to do that now. So these will be pushed up to GitHub on the master branch. We're going to have to do some magic in a bit with this config file, but for now, this is a good place to start. So I'm going to hit start building. This is going to go then look at GitHub and start building from the repo. So it's doing all the things it just told me, or we just told it to do. Checking out our code, restoring a cache, and installing the dependencies from Yarn. This will take a minute, of course. Saved the cache for possible use the next time around, so the Yarn step doesn't take so long. It's now running our tests. Tests passed. It's running lint, which may not pass. Yeah, look at that. All those lint errors. That's great, actually. So there's our very first build on this jobs microservice repo. And there are a bunch of problems because I haven't been paying particular attention to lint lately. So let's go and fix those things, and then we'll submit another build, and hopefully they'll pass the tests. So job listing .js has a problem that this campaign, let's see, where are my problems here? Campaign prop type is defined, but prop is never used. So what we should do here is just put a campaign in here, which is fine. That's probably actually meant to go inside of this guy. Okay, well, we should look at that in a second here. My voice is killing me. I'm going to go re-up on water. I'll be back in just a moment. Okay, sorry about that. I'm back. Let's do this thing. All right. So this is actually one case where lint is probably saving me. I've provided this campaign prop to the job listing, and it's not being used anywhere inside of this component, which is probably indicative of a logical error in this case. So we're going to look at this generate URL for job function. And actually we can see, thanks to VS Code, inside of this function, it looks for a campaign prop. I'll just click on it and show you. Looks for a campaign prop and passes that in as a part of the slug. So, oh, actually it's just up here, conveniently enough. So... we're just gonna sort of reformat this. This is not my favorite syntax sort of change in the world, but it should at least make that a little more clear here. Not jobs, job. Okay, great. So now that's used, that clears up that issue, so we're going to commit that. Use campaign if provided to job listing. We'll commit that, but not push it yet. And let's look at the other problems we've got here from the build. Minor segments is assigned a value but never used in job API. Job API. Okay, we're going to comment that out because I'm just not using it yet. Unused syntax. And in theory, my test should still pass. We can see what's wrong with lint if I run this locally here too. Great. Oh, actually, well, okay. I'm distracting myself too much. We're going to look for this error here. Test is not defined. I should be looking on the jest lint, ESLint. Env jest, aha. Ow, man, my cat just jumped onto my arm. Dude, you're killing me. Please. Oh, fuck. All right, I'm alive still. That's how you know we're doing it live. All right. Where was I? Son of a... okay, so in my ESLint definition here, I need an env of jest. We'll put that, oh yeah, no, in double quotes like prettier likes. And maybe that'll have addressed it. All right, needs a comma. Aha. Just true, I did that wrong. Okay. Boom, and that fixes that. So, I actually don't know if I even needed this plugin, to be honest. We'll let that be for now. So, this will be configure ESLint to expect jest syntax. Okay, now if I commit this code and I hit push and send it up to the branch on GitHub, it will kick off another build on Circle CI in a second. We saw it just popped up as queued, and it'll run through the test again. Damn, see if I'm bleeding over here. No blood. Just some good scrapes. What's going on here? Checkout code. Cool. So we can see this test running. It's now passed everything. Look at that. This build is now fixed. How cool is that? Very cool. I hope so. Excuse me. Sorry. Very slowly losing my voice here. Okay, so now we want to... now is when I need to start being more strict with how I'm doing this development work. So a pattern I like to follow when I'm working on small personal projects here without a bigger team is a modification of what's called the Git flow workflow, which is sort of just a pattern to follow with which branches you're using for development, how you run releases, and this and that. It's not super hard, but we can basically define some branches that we use specifically in one case versus the next. So when I'm building something, we can define Well, here, I'll just show you. Easier to show than to explain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a branch called develop, which will be sort of our working branch. In my settings for this project, I'm going to go to branches, and I'm going to protect both my master branch and my develop branch. So I'm going to hit protect, require pull request reviews before merging. Not going to do in this case because there's no one really to review my pull requests. You can't review your own pull requests on GitHub. I will require status checks to pass. It's already seen that CircleCI is run on this repo, so we're going to require that to pass. Require signed commits basically means that you have to have a verified SHA signature against your the Git account that or when you're pushing to Git. I believe I'm set up correctly for that. We might not include that. And then I'm going to include administrators because that's me. We will restrict who can push to this branch, specify teams allowed to push to this branch, required status checks will prevent the people from merging if the checks fail. Yeah, okay. We're going to set all of those things up. I'm going to add my password real quick. Grab it from my password manager. With lots of two-factorness going on there. Never, please. Okay, now that's all well and done. So we're going to go back up to here, and we're going to protect the develop branch as well with the same setups, status checks, CircleCI, signed commits, include administrators, restrict who can push, all of the above. So now that means that I cannot commit code directly to either of these branches, which means that I'm going to run a fetch here so I get the new branch from GitHub, so develop should show up here, which basically means that from here on in, this master branch will be treated as production, the develop branch will be treated as the staging environment, and then anything I do will be done in a branch that opens a pull request against first develop and then master. It sounds a little abstract at first, perhaps, but once you get used to it, it's not too bad. There are definitely different things you should do on bigger teams. This is what I do for projects with small teams, like my work with Gymnasium, where the development team is the guy you're looking at right now. So we're going to create a new branch from the develop branch. We're going to call it feature, and we will call it feature Heroku. No, we're not going to do Heroku yet. We're going to do CircleCI config. So now I have this branch because I can't commit code directly to develop and master. That's true. My team is not just me, but the only one writing code currently is me. The people testing the code and working with me to do designs and whatnot are also on the line. I don't mean to diminish anyone's egos, certainly. Thank you, Andrew. All right, so here's what I'm hoping to do here, is write some code here that in not in here, in my circle config, which will do some specific functionality depending on the branch that we're in. So because of this new pull request magic we're adding in, we want to make sure that there are certain behaviors in place for the develop branch and the master branch, which are now special cases. So let's do that. It's going to require some modification to this file, and that's totally okay. So we're looking for some syntax on the CircleCI config that's specific to branches, so I'll show you how I would find that. Well, these are sample config files, which is lovely. We're going to do configuration reference. And basically what I'm looking for is branches. Hey, look at that. So, defines rules for whitelisting, blacklisting, execution of some branches if workflows are not configured. If you're using workflows, job level branches will be ignored and must be configured in the workflows section of your config.yml file, which is probably what we need to do instead. So, see workflows section for details. Excuse me, sorry. Okay. So, the workflows setup basically runs certain tasks as a workflow within Circle CI. So basically, what it'll do is it'll break your config tasks into separate. Oh, it's hard to describe, but basically, we'll have one here that says test, one that says deploy. The test obviously will run all the tests. If the tests all pass, it'll then go into the deploy task, which we can use to push things up to Heroku. And actually, I may be overthinking it. This may not be necessary. Okay, let's hold off on that for now. Maybe now is when I should be setting up Heroku. So let's do that. So on a tab you can't see because I've forgotten, I'm creating a new Heroku dyno. Heroku runs basically small virtual machines, small virtualized environments to run bits of code. There are a number of service tiers they provide, from free up to super enterprise distributed stuff. We're going to start with the free one here because this is a small project in testing, but in the future when we go to sort of a production environment, we may choose to up that. So, well, let me connect it to GitHub on another screen just so I don't reveal any of my Git passwords accidentally. Oh, no password there. Well, great. I've now connected that. Let me bring this back to you. Lovely. So connected to Gymnasium Jobs Microservice. That's good. Enable automatic deploys from GitHub. We're going to wait for CI to pass before deployment. We're going to use develop for this one because this is going to be my staging environment. And we're going to enable automatic deploys. Now, there's some work we need to do to actually configure this for Circle CI, and we'll talk about that in a second here. We're not going to use a pipeline because we don't need to, well, to promote, well, we might end up doing that. Okay. So now we go into settings. Config variables are essentially environment variables for this instance, which we will end up using in the future. For today, we probably won't. We're going to add a build pack, which is basically how Heroku knows how to run your app, much like Jest used these Docker images. So Jest uses Docker images, Heroku uses build packs, which are different but similar in functionality. This is a Node.js project, so we will add the Node.js build pack. And I believe that might be all I need to do here to make this work. I believe. Oh, no, I'm sorry. There's one more step. So we're going to, I mean, that config should be saved. That's great. I am actually, since I didn't do anything, I'm going to rename this branch to feature Heroku config. And to run on Heroku, there's a special file that Heroku looks for. Oops, wrong screen. Heroku proc file. So there's a thing called a proc file that Heroku uses, which determines what job to run. And it looks like this, and there's some specific syntax for it. Basically, what you need to know is that the proc file runs a command that runs your app. It should go in the root of the project and be called proc file with a capital P. That one, see, it's already recognizing it as a Heroku thing in VS Code. There's some specific syntaxes here. But I believe actually npm is one of the special ones that works. Naming and location. It should be named proc file exactly, not anything else. Yes, yes, yes. Number of process type declarations each on a new line. Each process type is a declaration of a command that is executed when a dyno of that process type is started. For example, if a web process type is declared, then when a dyno of that type is started, the command associated with the web process type will be executed. That comma probably doesn't need to be there. This could mean starting a web server, for example. So basically, this is defining the type of process, and then this is the command it runs. So this is a Ruby on Rails app. That's a Clojure app, apparently. Java, all kinds of good stuff. In our case, this actually might be pretty simple. I think we can get away with yarn start. And that's it. So now we need to push this to this pull request. Add Heroku proc file. We will commit that and then push this, and now a couple of things should happen. So we should see a build start here. We can watch this run. It'll take a minute. Inside of this repo, there's now this new branch, feature Heroku config, which we can create a pull request against. We'll make a nice nice pull request here. I'm going to add myself as a Andrew here, your reviewer, and Justin. Jeremy's off today, I believe. I'm going to assign all of us. We will create this as an enhancement. There are no projects on this, no milestones, whatever. This should allow this project to be deployed on Heroku after this PR closes. Thumbs up. Create this pull request. You'll see that this pull request waited for the check to pass. We can show which check it was looking for. So I need to shut that off. I don't have signed commits coming from my machine right now. So my tests passed on Circle CI. That's lovely. So if we clicked on this, it would bring me back to this page. Everything worked as we would expect. We can now... I'm just going to go shut off those signed commits. That's a failing to set up my machine correctly here, really. But since I know me, I'm just going to shut this off. That's a terrible thing to say. Don't do this if you're not me. Okay, so now we can go back to that pull request. It is here. Now everything's hunky-dory. I can merge this pull request. Before I do, I'm going to go to the logs for this Heroku app, and hopefully we can watch it deploy. It should deploy. Let me show that again, because we have this set up to automatically come from under deploy here. It automatically deploys from the develop branch after CI passes, automatically when that branch is updated. So this is going to happen quickly, and I hope I can kind of make it through to watch all these things all at once. But when I close this pull request, when I merge this pull request, it's going to kick off a new build on here for that develop branch. When that build passes, it's going to kick off a deployment to this Heroku dyno. If that works, then we can view this from the web, I think. Maybe. All right, take a deep breath. Let's see what happens. Merge pull request. So I'm going to delete that branch. Well, we'll delete it if it works. So we can see this test is now running. Tests should pass shortly. Yarn test ran. Yarn lint ran. This build is now passing. If we come into here, in theory, I should see a build get kicked off here, I believe. Maybe. Maybe not. Might take a second. I might also not have configured this correctly. How do I view these logs? Yes? No? Oh! We're going to revert that pull request. You silly fool. I opened it against the wrong branch. Yeah, actually, I guess I don't really need to revert it in this case straight away. Damn. Okay, we're just going to do a new pull request and demonstrate the same thing. This should have been develop. And actually, because I made that mistake, I'm going to do this, which I set up for most of my repos, to set the default branch to develop rather than master, so that I have to, yes, update that, please. Basically, what that says is that now in this jobs microservice branch, develop will show up here first rather than master, so that when I create a new pull request from this guy here, that's not what I wanted. When I create a pull request from this branch here, it will go to develop automatically. So I'm going to make this pull request staging, add Heroku proc file. We'll do the same thing we just did, assign these guys so they get an email from GitHub, because who doesn't love emails? This should deploy set up deployments to Heroku staging from PRs on the develop branch. Okay. I'm going to create this pull request. It'll run tests. No, it's already run the tests here. That's good. We're going to come back here. We're going to watch all this stuff happen again. Hopefully it'll work like I expect. So this is now against develop. We'll merge this pull request. We'll see the new tests fire off here. These are, by the way, are all sort of growing pains that happen when you set up this DevOps stuff. Typically, traditionally, when I've set up Circle CI, it's taken, like, on more complicated projects, sometimes dozens of tries to get the Circle tests to even run. So consider this a pretty good setup. This is now running. That's setting up the Docker image that this test will be running on. Doing all of the things, installing all of the packages. Running my test cases. That build passed. Maybe a release will run now. Oh, there we go. Build started. I'm not sure how long this will take, to be honest. I'd expect maybe a minute or two. Uh-oh. Error. NodeMon not found. Ah, okay. So, that's a good point. For my development environment, I have this running node monitor, which does the Babel conversions and then runs Yeah, so it runs a couple of commands at once. It runs this nodemon command, which looks for changes. So we're actually going to have to update this. So this is going to now be my start dev command. And we'll have a start server command, which will just run the transpiled code. And I'm going to have to actually test which command that is. So let's come into here, and we're going to run node and all of that. No, that didn't work. Okay. Oh, I see. So we're going to have a build step. Okay, so there's going to be a few things that get added here. Build, which will compile transpile my code. So this will be the Babel node bit. And then we're going to have start server, which runs yarn build and node index.js. But that index.js is going to be in a built directory somewhere here. So let's see how that has to work. All of this is jumping through some hoops to make everything work because we have to transpile our code because we chose to use ES6 syntax in the app here. Right? Maybe? Yeah. It's not the ES6 syntax, it's the JSX syntax. That's the problem here. So okay. Okay. This is what I'm looking to execute. But I think I need some help here. Val, print, only, ignore, extensions, plugins, presets. You know what? It's possible that this might be what I need to run. So I'm just trying to figure out which command needs to run to do the transpiling and then run the web service, which I think is, and then this list of presets after sweet. I think that did it. So let's make sure this is running and doing what we expect. Yeah, okay, that worked. So it's actually simpler than I thought it was. We don't need a build step because that's kind of happening on the fly here. I'm going to run that command as my start server command. So that's going to be node. It's going to be just what I dumped into the console here a second ago. And actually, we might not even need node there. I might even just be able to say this if I run it with yarn. yarn start server. Need a comma. Totally, that works. Okay, so now we have the start server command, which runs the transpiled service without running this node monitor, which is what I'm using in my dev environment to monitor for changes. So we're going to commit that. So, and actually I need to change the proc file too to run start server, which will run this command instead of just start. So, add start server script to package.json. We will do the same thing we did before. That'll kick off a test. We'll create a pull request. We'll do all that. Excuse me. Test running right now. We're going to create another pull request, probably on that same branch even. Call it Heroku take 2. We'll say what this PR does. We don't need to run. Ooh, actually, this might not work. I will explain that in a second too. Reviewers, I'm gonna dispatch with all that stuff for now. We will label it as an enhancement and assign myself. Why not? Okay. Make a pull request. Now, once again, we should see all this magic happen. That build passed. We're good to go. We're going to merge this pull request into develop. It will run tests. Tests will run and pass. Heroku will detect a deployment trigger. There it is, build started. And we'll see what happens. Crap, it didn't work. Okay, I had a feeling this would be the case. That is because Babel node runs from Babel CLI, which I put in as a dev dependency, which means that on Heroku, it doesn't get installed because Heroku is running this as a production environment, and it's not installing these dev dependencies. So I'm going to move all of these Babel dependencies over to dependencies. And we'll try that. Move Babel deps to dependencies, since Heroku needs some. Commit that, push that, it'll run a test, we'll make another pull request. The circle of life carries on. Assign it myself, label it as an enhancement because that's what I do. Create a pull request. These tests might already be done. They're not done yet. We can wait for the test to complete. It should still show up here. Good. Good. Merge the pull request. Watch this all happen again. Here goes another test. State changed from starting to crashed. Lovely. Remember when I said sometimes it takes dozens of commits to make this all work? Par for the course. For me, at least. Nobody's perfect. Build started. Sometimes I don't even need help breaking all the stuff. State changed from crashing to starting. Aha. That might be a problem. Okay, we're going to open the app. We probably won't see anything here, funny enough. I need to pass in a port, I believe. Well, yeah, okay. That's partially a problem. So the server is only running on port 3000, but Heroku decides which port to run on for you. And so there's some magic we need to use inside of the script that runs this whole thing. There we go. That looks familiar. So that should do it now. So what this did is if the process that's spinning up this specifies a port, the app will listen on that port. We need to do or 3000 to give it a default one. Here, we'll do const port equals or 3000. And we're going to do app.listen port, and we're going to change this to display me which port, which is not super important, but yeah, and we're going to say running and give it one of those and maybe an emoji for good measure. How about the old head explode? Great. We'll see if that breaks anything. Okay. To allow for a port to be specified by the running process. This is required for Heroku to work correctly, like I said, because Heroku does not expose port 3000 by default on everything that they do on all of their dynos. The port is in fact passed into the build environment sort of dynamically. So we're going to make yet another pull request, yet another deployment. Assign myself an enhancement, create a pull request. We're getting better at this. Wait for these tests to complete. We'll be in good shape in no time. My cat says hi again. What's up, man? You're standing on my keyboard. Okay, let's merge this pull request. Please don't knock over my water bottle. It kicks off another test. Test runs and takes approximately 30 to 45 seconds. You now get to hear the cat. Sorry about that. That is continuous integration step 1 completed. Now step 2 for the actual deployment. We'll take a second to recognize as I lean around the cat to figure out what's going on here. Build started. Build succeeded. Hopefully now it binds to the correct port. You can see actually that Heroku killed the last one because it didn't bind to the right port. Where did it say that? Yeah, boot timeout. Web process failed to bind to port within 60 seconds of launch. Running on port. It's changed from starting to up. Open app. Boom! We're deployed to the web. Now we have a public-facing microservice in a staging environment through continuous integration, from adding a commit to a repo, to opening a pull request, to getting it tested, to deploying it to Heroku, all with the flick of a wrist. So now any code that I deploy will go up to this staging environment from my environment, so that my team can look at it, and then we can use this URL to test in our staging URL. Piece of cake. We could also map this to a custom domain if we like, and really that's all there is to it. Yeah, we accomplished a lot today. I got to learn a bit as I went. I wrote some kind of lame test cases. Maybe next week we'll write some more tests. In all honesty, I'll probably move into doing a bit more of the dynamic work for this, some of the styling and all that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the stream today. I had a lot of fun. I'm losing my voice. My throat hurts. And there's a cat that apparently needs attention, so I'm going to get going. Thanks for hanging out. I will catch you guys next week. If you need to find me, you can get me on Twitter at irreverentmike. My email address is mbyfolco@aquint.com. Yeah, catch you next week. See ya.